this out, we put this up first, well, just because it's the big news from yesterday, but if you have any questions as we discuss this, if there's any questions and you wanna call Doug Dawson and get him on the phone, we can do that. He's ahead of us, and Doug gets up very, very early in the morning, so we get up, we go to bed kinda early, so if they have any questions for Doug, we should be thinking about them now. He has presented to you, and it's in everybody's packet, I'm sure I don't have enough for everybody, a report on what he thinks are our next steps regarding the business plan and the things he's actually already contemplating doing. This one right here, it should be at the back of your... Because Sibley County is no longer part of the project, they have to break out all those costs. And there'll be a significant drop in construction costs. It will change a few other things like the routing of the rings, which has been designed to pass everyone in the rural areas. It's also going to eliminate a few huts that they had designed to serve the rural areas. They're looking at the cost of either dropping Henderson or not, because we don't know if they're in or not. And he expects to have the engineering estimates done soon, which would allow them to have the business plan to us by next Wednesday. That may be problematic because there's a finance call on Tuesday. We may need some more information by then. We'll have to talk to Doug. And rather than wait for the Henderson decision, he said he's going to work on a plan with Henderson and without Henderson, so that we have it covered both ways. That will save a week rather than waiting on a decision from them.
We'll do a decision at the next board meeting unless I need to call a special meeting.
Which is when?
November
20th or 21st, whatever the first meeting.
On the agenda for tonight is also to officially set the deadline for participation in what we talked about with October 30th. So you may want to call a special meeting. Okay. They looked at this issue a long time ago as a what if, and Doug's recollection is that with Sibley County out, it ought to lower the penetration rate needed to break even. That's the primary thing he'll be looking at in the revised business plan, is that break even point. The bond size will get smaller, and the amount of the guarantee for the debt service reserve fund that any city or county will be making will get smaller. We've hired Spectrum Engineering as our engineer, and he's working with them to give us a revised estimate for the cost of engineering and construction management. He does need some input from the Joint Powers Board. He'd like to know the estimated new legal cost for the project that will be reimbursed from the bond proceeds. He also needs to know if we have a plan to reimburse the county for the cost they have put in so far. I think what he means by that is, are we going to bill Sibley County for parts of the legal expenses to this date? And that's Doug's report. Are there any questions for that? Because if there are, we can get Doug on the phone.
Wouldn't he be talking about the expenses that we're going to be recouped through the bonds? Like the initial money we put in? Isn't that the money he'd be talking about?
He's talking about that, and he also needs to know, you're right, Bob. He needs to know if we're going to reimburse the county for their costs from the bond proceeds. So that's a decision the board would have to make.
Did Arlington get reimbursed?
No.
And one of these business plans that would be done?
Wednesday. The revised business plan will be done by next Wednesday.
What?
Well, it depends on what the board, we anticipate the board setting the next meeting for Thursday to make a decision to move forward with who's in. So, you
can have it by Wednesday.
that would be good, yeah.
You can act on it.
That'll work. That'll work.
Doug?
I have the question is to anything that we've voted on in the Joint Powers Board in the past, past having to do with reserve funds and each particular entity's percentage. That stuff all had to go back to the particular entity to be voted on if they're going to go ahead with that.
Yes.
Being that Sibley County is no longer in it, and the entire business plan changes, doesn't that all have to be re-voted on?
Yes.
Okay. I just want that on the record so that.
And everybody's gonna vote on that by October 30th?
No. The towns, there's 10 towns in Renville County who have approved their bond resolutions.
Okay.
So they're, in essence, they're chips on the table, they're in. And now that Sibley County's out, the business plan will be revised. The assumption is that they're in, but we have to go back with a new resolution with new costs and things.
I have a question. I'm wondering if any of this financing is addressed in our joint powers agreement as to what we agreed to if an entity dropped out. I'm just curious. So,
To my recollection, there is not anything in the joint powers agreement regarding reimbursement of funds should an entity drop out for legal fees or any other fees that the cities have put in up to that point. I could be wrong, but that's my recollection.
I believe that's correct, Bob?
Chair Bob Moses, Community Driven. I haven't been at the board before. I served as your general counsel, city general counsel. I'm going to duck and cover a little bit. I would want to look at the joint powers agreement to be sure about that. I think, though, the important thing to understand is that absent Sibley County's participation, we're talking about the original joint powers agreement, not the amended joint powers agreement. The amended joint powers agreement is one of the documents that will have to be reapproved. Again, I don't have the documents in front of me, but that is my initial response to that. I think it's a good question how the allocation needs to be reapportioned, and clearly there's going to need to be a vote by the members on that.
okay.
I got one question.
Yeah.
How does the bond resolution hold a city in, when we still have to vote on whether there are, on these new business plan stuff? I mean, let's say city decides, some other city decides next meeting, they like to do percentages, they change their mind, they're out.
I expect that folks would be able to act again, you know, much as we've already discussed, or you've already discussed. You know, ultimately, we have to go back to each entity to appoint special counsel on the, you know, on the legal issue that we are looking for special counsel to address, you know, providing an opinion. At that point, I'm anticipating that the revised, you know, documents, the indenture, the debt service reserve fund shortfall agreement, all of that are modified, reviewed, discussed, and acted on at that time as well. So, you know, frankly, it will be a new deal. There will be different terms, and so everybody would need to act on those again and decide whether or not they're appropriate. So.
And the deadline for that, is there a deadline for selling bonds, or having that be approved?
We recognize that we had to go back to, you know, all the cities and county already for this special counsel issue. So, you know, our expectation is that we're going to be before all of the cities and counties in the next 30 days. So, with revised documents, with revised business plan, with, you know, everything, the information that we need to review in order to make an educated decision.
So, just so I'm clear, within our next council meeting is on the 13th. So, we're gonna have all those documents prior to the 13th?
We may or may not. I think the expectation will be, if you want to move this forward quickly, you may be asked to hold a special meeting, so.
My question is that, so that I can tell my fellow council members at our next meeting that, okay, if we don't have those, because I don't want to get those on the 13th, which I wouldn't, because the meeting doesn't go, but, I don't want to get those 2 days before we're supposed to look at those and vote on it, because we want to make sure that we've got time to review them and make an intelligent decision on
I
those
agree.
matters.
I agree. I would also add that, you know, Grand Shea has indicated in their proposal, if it's accepted, that they would intend to meet with everybody. So I think you'll have the added benefit of their explanation, you know, of the documents as well. So I think you may want a special meeting anyway, you know, just because you'll spend a fair amount of time reviewing documents, discussing the issues with the Grand Shea if you move forward with that particular issue, so.
Did,
Okay.
did McGray Shea say how long they anticipate that it would take for them to get their opinion back? Should everybody on the Joint Powers Board say, yes, we want you to be part of this for us, and they indicate how long it's going to take them to get that opinion back?
I don't think they're gonna be here tonight, so you can ask them that question specifically. I think they're relying on, you know, their timeline relies somewhat on being able to meet with every community in the county, you know, all the councils and county boards, so. Ultimately, it will be a significant task to organize meeting dates, when we're gonna have documents available, that sort of thing, but I'm anticipating that most of that can be accomplished fairly quickly. Again, you know, the documents themselves, you know, the folks that are drafting those know what items need to be changed in order to properly reflect, you know, what's occurred. And so it's not gonna take a huge amount of time once Doug's finished his work in order to modify documents and have them ready to present with the new terms and those sorts of things. So, you know, we're not taking all this legal work and throwing it out the window. We're using the vast majority of it and simply modifying it to accommodate the new facts.
Okay, so can I ask you, so that I can write this down, for my own use, when Jim and I go back to our council, what can we go back and tell them that they can expect to be reviewing at a special meeting or whenever it's decided to meet? So it's the debt shortfall.
It will be the same documents we've talked about previously. The debt service reserve fund replenishment agreement, the trust indenture. We'll probably have a narrative on the business plan, you know, that discusses all of the critical business points, the penetration rate that's needed. It will, you know, the debt service reserve fund shortfall agreement talks about, you know, members' responsibilities in the event of a shortfall. We'll have a narrative that describes that as well. But ultimately, you're acting on the same documents. In addition to that, you're also acting on, you know, whether or not you're willing to engage McGrann Shea as special counsel. And, you know, they'll be discussing that with each individual city and county, so.
So I see that one of the items here is the timeline for moving forward. So I know there are a lot of things that need to come together in order to develop a timeline, but when do you think that you or whoever will have an idea of when we could reasonably set a timeline for having all the documents back from the cities and counties?
My expectation is that we could have documents available, you know, to go out to all of the entities likely by the end of next week. If we have that business plan updated, again, you know, modifying those documents to accommodate the revised business plan shouldn't take that long. I'm speaking for a coworker of Bob's, but, you know, really, I don't expect that that would take as long as we might expect, so.
I think that's right.
So then the drop dead, it would be probably 2 weeks after that.
No, we need to know which cities are in on the revised business plan, because if, who's in on this next round, so we can figure you in. So we need to know by next Wednesday if Henderson's in, or if.
Well, that's gonna be tough for us to make a decision without the revised plan.
Well, but you're making the revised plan on the, you're saying, we're in on the assumption that it's gonna be a better plan. That because the rural's out, there's a lot of cost that drops out of it, but penetration rate drops. So there's a little bit of leap of faith here. When you get the document at your council meeting to review, you don't have to approve them. But we need to know if you're going to be in on the next round. When you get to those and you say, no, we're out. You know, taking out Sibley County out of the mix, which is roughly 2/3 of the cost, is a larger task. You know, taking out a smaller city, any of the cities, is not quite as large.
The question I have is, how can we, as a joint powers board, expect an entity to approve a new business plan and new debt service stuff without seeing that before you vote? That doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
Shannon?
I'll speak for Mark. He wasn't saying that. What he's saying is that in light of what's been happening politically, we're trying to measure what a core group of folks are going forward in order to draft these documents. Because if we have folks that, you know, don't feel like they're committed to the project any longer, we would just as soon have them out of the project now before we revamp documents and business plans. And then ultimately everybody absolutely decides based on firm information that's in front of them. But before we start drafting and redrafting all those documents, you know, I think what they're looking for is that initial show of commitment by approving the 2 resolutions contingent upon, you know, opinion of special counsel and that sort of thing. That's not a binding commitment. If any city or county later got documents that, you know, they weren't comfortable with the business plan in final form, they weren't comfortable with the shortfall, the debt service reserve fund replenishment agreement, you know, ultimately they would act at that point. But I think what Mark is talking about is an initial show of, you know, are you committed to the project or not? Because each time somebody drops out, it causes us an awful lot of work to go back around to every other community once again and get their commitment to a revised project. So, you know, that's what ultimately is trying to be addressed. You know, it's difficult, if not impossible, to actually address that, but that's what there's an attempt being made to address. So.
I just want to be sure that any city that would say next Wednesday or the following Wednesday, whatever the date may be, that if they say, yeah, we're still in, that they're not 100% committed to any obligations until after they've had opportunity to review the documents and approve those documents.
Right.
That's, I just want to be sure that that is clear.
What's the punishment to Henderson then? Because Henderson's been waiting for all the information that they can possibly get before they make a decision. And now I just talked to a council member tonight, and he's gonna be waiting for the final business plan before he can make a decision. What's our punishment to not meeting the October 30th deadline and then wanting to rejoin the RS Fiber after that if he's happy with the new business plan?
Everything needs to be rewritten and then more legal costs.
Well, yeah, what we're up against is we don't want to punish anybody. So what we're up against here is a deadline. We'll run out of time. get it done so we can build it, because we have construction seasons and stuff. So, we're looking for that initial commitment, and we need it by a certain date. That's what we, in essence, told Sibley County.